Chapter 9. Oh, Paul tried to shout. Slight pause while Sophie translated.
I've sent an email to Mr. Tanner, she said blithely. You see, I think I've figured out where we are. If this is really a different dimension, it's got to be the artificial one that Professor Van Spee made for himself. I've been working with him, you see, ever since you died. Whatever. Anyway, he told me about it. It's how all his inventions work. And the thing is, although you can't get backwards and forwards, like physically, it's possible to send an email, because theoretically it's all the same dimension, just phased differently because of the elemental resonances.
Yeah, but Tanner, Paul howled, ignoring the pain in his jaw. He's going to kill me. He thinks I murdered Ricky Wormtoter. Sophie gave him her own special don't be so silly look.
Oh, we'll explain all that, she said. Obviously it couldn't have been you. You wouldn't hurt a fly. I expect he was just, what's the expression they use? Eliminating you from their inquiries.
Behind them the door flew open. Paul swung round to see who'd burst in and saw someone who looked just like Ricky Wormtoter. Except that Ricky was dead, wasn't he? But it wasn't the new arrival's identity that was monopolising his attention. It was the long, shiny sword he was gripping in his outstretched right hand, so that the needle-sharp point was just bending the skin slightly under Sophie's chin. "Apologies for the melodrama," he said, and he sounded just like Ricky. "You stay absolutely still." It was one of those occasions when ambiguity was not your friend. Me?" Paul squeaked. "Good Lord, no. You can move about as much as you like. Her. And before you make a complete ass of yourself trying to rescue her, you might like to know she just sent an email to Dennis Tanner, letting him know you're here. Hence," he added grimly, "the trace elements of distrust and downright animosity clouding my otherwise stunning disposition." I know, Paul said. "She was only trying to help." Sophie had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout all this. Now she yelped, "That's right," in a tiny little voice. Something about it, probably the tininess, seemed to convince Ricky that she wasn't a threat. He pulled the sword back and lowered it.
"Bastard!"
Sophie screamed at him.
"And anyway, you're dead."
"So's he," Ricky replied reasonably, nodding towards Paul. "And you're not yelling at him." Yes, but she hit me on the jaw a few minutes ago," Paul couldn't help pointing out. "Maybe she just doesn't like dead people," Ricky suggested. Talking of which, Paul didn't have a sword handy, and he was pretty sure he didn't pack a mean right cross like Ms. Pettingill, but there was a fat, heavy-looking book on the desk a few inches from his right hand. He picked it up and threw it at Ricky's head. Probably only sheer luck that it connected, because Paul had lousy hand-eye coordination and cleared pubs in seconds whenever he hefted a dart, but the effect was quite dramatic. Ricky tottered sideways, caught his foot on the coal of the spaghetti that spewed out of the back of the computer, and keeled over, dragging the monitor and the keyboard down with him. There was a rather satisfying crash and even a few sparks. "Bastard," Paul said conversationally, echoing Sophie and rubbing his jaw. It was starting to feel much better now. And why aren't you dead, anyway? Tanner thinks you are. He thinks I killed you." "You bloody nearly did," Ricky growled, gathering himself up off the floor. "Talk about gratitude. Thank you so much, Ricky, for rushing down here to save me the moment you saw that email on the office net. Oh, and by the way, here's a broken skull as a token of our appreciation." Sophie just glowered at him.
"You can't feel it, though," she said. "You're dead."
"Oh, be quiet," Ricky snapped. "And now, if you two pinheads have quite finished, could we possibly go somewhere else before Dennis and his horrible relatives find us? I've been to a lot of trouble to get out of the way for a bit, and I'd hate for it all to go to waste." Paul wasn't so sure about that. If Dennis Tanner came charging in and found him and a perfectly healthy, bruises aside Ricky Wormtoter, it would solve at least one of his major problems. On the other hand, there weren't any more big fat books handy, and he wasn't thrilled at the idea of stopping Ricky leaving if he wanted to go somewhere. If Ricky left and then Tanner turned up, it would probably be very bad. "Please yourself," he muttered. "Where do you suggest, anyhow?" "Closed file store," Ricky said. "You know what it's like in there. Dennis won't set a foot in the place unless he's absolutely got to, and that's a version in normal space. I believe the one over this side is a lot stranger." Hardly encouraging, but Ricky was already striding down the corridor. "Might as well," Paul hissed to Sophie, who nodded glumly and followed him. I hope you don't mind me borrowing this, Ricky barked out as they scurried to keep up with him. It took Paul a second or so to figure out that this referred to the sword in Ricky's hand. Paul hadn't bothered examining it in any detail while it had been tucked under Sophie's chin. Now Ricky happened to mention it, however, he couldn't help noticing the glossy brown sheen of the blade, the extravagant pattern of silver whorls deep inside the steel. A sword transcending dimensions, a living blade, the other half of Vicky the mermaid. Evidently, that was how Ricky had got into Custard space. It was also a way out, and not a Van Spee's crystal needed, which meant, presumably, no need for Colin the Goblin to be inconvenienced as and when Sophie crossed back into real space. It was slightly unsettling to think that the sword was also viewed from a certain perspective, 50% of Ricky's ex-wife, but that really wasn't any of Paul's business. I suppose I owe you an apology, Ricky went on, as he lunged off down a corridor that Paul wasn't sure he'd ever been in before. Framing you for my death, I mean. Sorry about that, only I didn't realise it was you and not that Philip Marlowe person till it was too late. Plans all made, you see, everything scheduled and timetabled. I had to press on and hope you find a way of coping, which obviously you did. I always knew you were the resourceful type. Hang on, Paul said. You knew it was me? The back of Ricky's head nodded. On the first floor landing. You were standing in front of the mirror, and it's an imp reflector, like the top of the table in the boardroom. It shows things as they really are, not as they appear to be. I caught sight of your reflection in it, and I knew right away. For some reason best known to yourself, you were back alive again and disguised as that Marlowe bloke. Of course, I've never met Marlowe. I only know what he looks like from his personnel files, so... You knew it was me? Paul repeated. And anyway, it doesn't matter, even if it hadn't been me, even if it really had been Phil Marlowe. What the hell do you think you were doing, making it look like he'd poisoned you to death? A slight shrug as Ricky shoved open the closed file store door. It was him or me, he said. All right, it was someone or me, and I don't know this Marlowe guy from a bar of soap, so the hell with it. If you've got to dump 1,000,000 tons of horseshit on the head of an innocent man, it is better if it's a stranger rather than a close friend or valued colleague, right? No, Paul said, but Ricky wasn't listening. It clicked into full action-adventure mode, creeping stealthily along the walls and racks of shelving with a sword at the ready, carefully searching for hidden enemies and other lurking hazards. He carried on like that for a minute or so until he tripped over a discarded electric fan, barked his shin on a shelf bracket, and gave the whole thing up as a bad job. I think we're safe here, he said, limping back to where Paul and Sophie were waiting for him. For now, anyway. In silly, this being Van Spee's dimension, there shouldn't be anything alive here apart from us. Just inanimate objects. Some of the stuff that's got chucked in here over the years, so it's hard to draw the line, if you know what I mean. In most offices, old bits of equipment get slung in the lumber room because they've died suddenly. Here, so. Sometimes it's the other way round. He paused and shuddered slightly. I particularly remember an old green filing cabinet that took to following people about, usually just after lunch. Finally we got it cornered, dragged it in here and bolted it securely to the wall just over there. He pointed to a patch of broken, crumbling plaster, where it looked as though something had yanked itself free with extreme force. Oh, Ricky said. Bugger. Never mind. You knew it was me, Paul repeated for the second time. They were going to kill me. I was locked up in the strong room with a bunch of goblins standing guard while they had a partners' meeting to decide how to put me to death, and all the time it was important. Ricky sounded angry and guilty both at the same time. When you're up against someone like that, with your life on the line, you can't muck about. Sometimes one of the good guys gets hurt in the process. Can't be helped. I'm sorry. You're sorry, Paul said. Fine.
Hang on.
Sophie had that dangerous tomp in her voice that commanded attention.
Something not quite right here. You said your life was on the line.
Ricky nodded enthusiastically. That's right, he said. It was.
So you thought I'll cunningly cheat death by dying?
She clicked her tongue.
Couldn't you have just, I don't know, emigrated to Canada and grown a beard or something?
Paul was impressed. He'd never seen anybody move so quickly. Ricky swung round, making a conscious decision at the last moment to belay the instinct to poke Sophie under the chin with his sword again. Canada, he said. What the hell do you know about Canada? Sophie had backed away into the corner of a rack of shelves.
All right then, Australia, or Papua bloody New Guinea. What I meant was...
Ricky relaxed from the soles of his feet up. "Sorry," he said. "Private joke. And to answer your question, absolutely no dice. He's not someone you can run away from just by going somewhere very fast in an unexpected direction. That'd be like looking for a gas leak with a lighted match. That's why I had to come here, of course, to Space. It's the only place in this or any world where he can't come after me." Excuse me," Paul said in a quiet voice. "But, who's he exactly?" "What?" Ricky looked as though he'd just run through a locked plate glass door without knowing it was there. "You don't know? Oh, for crying out loud!" He sagged, leaning against a shelf unit. "You mean you haven't really got the foggiest idea what's going on around here?" "No," said Paul and Sophie at precisely the same moment.
"But you're going to tell us," Sophie added savagely, "or I will personally take that overgrown pencil sharpener off you and stick it right up your—"
Then she screamed. It was a full-blooded, extra-volume, super-high-fidelity rendition of the classic sci-fi B-movie Scream. The sort of thing you'd expect to hear in any sleepy, small, Midwestern American community when the Martians or the pod people blow into town. It wasn't the typical reaction of a sophisticated young urban woman faced with an everyday kitchen appliance. On the other hand, there has to be an element of give and take in these matters. People shouldn't freak out at the mere sight of fridge freezers. Fridge freezers, by the same token, shouldn't suddenly lunge out of the shadows and fling their doors open. The different ways in which Sophie, Ricky and Paul reacted to this sudden intrusion were, in many respects, illuminating. Sophie started yelling like a pig in a blender. Ricky, by contrast, sprang into action. He jumped up, landed perfectly poised on the balls of his feet, legs or shoulders width apart, leaning slightly forward at the waist. His left hand grasped a chair, held out as an improvised shield, while he gripped the sword with his right in a coaching manual perfect high backhand guard. For his part, Paul stood rooted to the spot, staring at the white light pouring out of the open fridge door, which backlit its contents, a sad-looking lump of antique cheese and a milk carton. They looked very familiar. "Hang on," Paul said. "Quiet," Ricky hissed. "It's confused. Can't figure out which of us to attack first. That's our best chance. Keep it off guard, so if you keep absolutely still." "No, listen," Paul said. "That's my fridge." "Don't be silly," Ricky snapped at him. "What'd your fridge be doing here, stalking us now on the count of three?" It is, Paul insisted. "It's my fridge. That's a pint of milk I bought in the 7-Eleven on the corner of Ascot Terrace 10 days ago. Look, it's still got the little sticky price tag with their name on it."
"Actually, he's right," Sophie broke in. "I remember it now from the flat. It's got that scratch, look, down at the bottom where you bashed into it that time with the hoover."
"On the count of three," Ricky repeated loudly, but he'd forfeited their attention. Rather huffily, he straightened his back and put the chair down, though without entirely relaxing his grip on the sword. "All right," he said, "so it's your fridge. You deal with the bloody thing. Give it a carrot or blow up its nose or something. Whatever it is you usually do when it goes berserk." Paul frowned. It's never done anything like this before," he said. "I've had it for ages. It's never been any bother." "Sod it," Ricky said. "I'm a knight of the Holy Grail and an honorary lieutenant colonel of the Riders of Rohan. I'm bucket if I'm going to be backed into corners by a proxy fridge." He strode forward, reaching out his hand to give the fridge a shove. As soon as he was within range, the fridge swung its door at him with appalling force. Ricky flew across the room like a cricket ball middled by a cover drive, slammed up against the wall, and went to sleep. "Idiot," said the fridge contemptuously. "Anyhow, that's him out of the way for a bit. Didn't want to talk in front of strangers, obviously. Now then, where were we? As I recall, Utgarth-Loki had just stolen the great cow of heaven from the gods." His memory, Paul suddenly realised, was a jigsaw, and there'd been a piece missing for quite some time, only he hadn't noticed that it wasn't there. "You talked to me," he said. "That night, after I came back from the pub and all the fuses were blown, you were telling me all sorts of weird shit about gods and stuff." The fridge sighed. "This is what you get," it said sadly, "for trying to be user-friendly. Burning bushes don't have to put up with this sort of apathy. But here I am, making a real effort not to be scary or intrusive, and you can't even be bothered to remember what I told you. It's in one ear and out the other with you people. All right, here we go again, in the beginning. Sophie, meanwhile, appeared to have had just about as much as she could take. She jumped up and stood in front of the fridge, though Paul noticed just slightly more than a door's width away from it, with her hands on her hips. He couldn't see the look on her face and reckoned that was probably just as well.
"No," she said. "Shut up a minute. I want to ask you something."
The fridge clicked some internal component, probably a valve. "I remember her," it said. "Bloody door slammer. Please don't tell me you've made up and she's moving back in. I don't think my seals could stand it. Anyway, Indy."
"Quiet!"
The fridge door might have quivered for just a moment. If so, the fridge thought better of it.
"That's better," Sophie said. "Now, I want answers. If you're the fridge from the flat, what are you doing in here? And how come you can talk anyway?"
"I was just about to tell you," the fridge answered stiffly, "only you started shouting at me. I hate that."
"Oh,"
Sophie shrugged.
"Fine, carry on."
"Thank you so bloody much. Right, as I was saying, in the beginning," Sophie practically flickered with rage.
"Fridge!"
"It's a long story," the fridge protested. "He's heard a bit of it already, but he's forgotten, and you've got to hear all of it, or none of it makes sense. Look, do you want me to explain, or don't you?"
"Explain,"
Sophie repeated.
"You can do that?"
"Yes,
"Really?"
of course I can. I can explain the whole bloody thing from start to finish, if only you clowns give me the chance. Maybe you haven't got your thick skulls around this yet, but I'm not your bog-standard run-of-the-mill food storage unit. I exist simultaneously in all known dimensions, and I transcend the elements like a rainbow bridge. I know all that was, all that is, and a fair old chunk of what will be. The tiny trivial footnote to history you're concerned with is only the smallest fraction of... All right, don't pull faces at me and stop bobbing up and down like that. It makes me dizzy." There was a moment in which the immovable object reached breaking strain, and then Sophie said sorry and sat down on the floor.
"I won't interrupt any more," she said. "Promise."
"Splendid," said the fridge. "Finally, here we go. In the beginning..." That was as far as it got, because Ricky Wormtorder, who'd woken up from his concussed sleep while their attention had been elsewhere, suddenly surged to his feet and in one smooth, seamless movement grabbed the sword, hop-skipped, lunged across the floor and drove the blade into the fridge's works. A bang, a cloud of foggy gas, a brief shower of sparks, and Ricky dragged the sword out of the gaping hole it had made, and water gushed out as the fridge slowly keeled over and crashed sidelong to the floor. Ricky howled with savage triumph and swung the sword over his head in a barbaric gesture of victory, inadvertently clobbering the lampshade so the contrast of light and shadow danced around the room like Tinkerbell running for a bus.
"Ricky,"
said Sophie in a soft, deadly voice. "Eat that, fridge!" Ricky snarled as he reached up to steady the lampshade. "You try pushing the graph on Wormtorder around, you get what's..."
"Ricky,"
Sophie repeated.
"you total idiot. What the hell did you do that for?"
"It hit me," Ricky replied, a wounded look on his face. "Bastard thing stamped me against the wall. You've got to take a hard line with these things, so the next thing you know,
you killed it."
Ricky had lowered the sword by now. He was looking ever so slightly embarrassed in an utterly defiant sort of way. "Don't anthropomorphize," he said. "It's a fridge. Fridges are machines. You can't kill a machine. You can bust it," he admitted. "You can bust it real good," he added with relish, as a lesson to any other arrogant son of a bitch barrel-load of valves that reckons he can shove a Grail Knight around and get away.
"You know what I think?"
Sophie said, ignoring him completely.
"I think you just murdered old Mr. Wells."
The look on Ricky's face was really rather impressive. Commission any of the greatest artists in history and tell them to depict a blend of horror, guilt, fear, disgust, disbelief, embarrassment, and very, very profound annoyance using just a nose, 2 eyes, and a mouth. Ricky did it better than any of them, unpaid and without even having to think or consult a mirror. "What makes you say that?" he mumbled.
"Think about it," Sophie said. "Nobody's seen him in ages, right? And it's a known fact, as soon as the poo hits the ventilation system round here, what does old Mr. Wells do? Turns into something. First he was that stapler thing for years and years. Then, when Countess Judy was on the rampage, he turned himself into a bad cold and hid inside people's heads till it's safe to come out. And now, with all this weirdness going on, you dead and Paul being hunted for murder, quite suddenly a talking fridge pops up out of nowhere and says it'll explain everything. She clicked her tongue. Naturally, I hope I'm wrong, but if not... Ricky said something under his breath that rhymed with luck. Stupid bastard, he added bitterly. Why didn't he say anything? Let us know what he was up to. Of all the inconsiderate... Paul wasn't listening to any of this. He had no idea why, but he was on his knees beside the fallen fridge. If there were tears in his eyes, it may have been that once, long ago, he'd kept onions in it and the powerful chemicals still lingered. After a long time, he looked up at Ricky and his expression wasn't friendly. You arsehole, he said. You stabbed my fridge. Now look at it. Ricky scowled at him. Look, I said I'm sorry. I'll get you a new one. I'll get you a bloody Zanussi. Right now, that's the least of my problems. If she's frightened, that's really Jack Wells in there. Oh, shut up, Paul commanded. And to his surprise, Ricky did as he was told. I remember, he went on. Back home, at the flat, I came in late one night and it started telling me stuff about what happened in the beginning, Utgar something, and the great cow of heaven. Seemed to think it was important. He frowned in Ricky's direction. And now, he added thoughtfully, you've killed it. All right, Ricky protested. All right, I get the message. My butt, I'm very, very sorry. Next time a piece of electrical equipment uses me as a punch bag, I'll turn the other bloody cheek. Nothing we can do about it now, though. So I really think we should stop stressing and do something practical. Really? Sophie said. Such as? Awkward silence. Sorry, Sophie went on. I forgot. You're a man of action, and long words bother you. All right, here's a suggestion. First, you tell us both exactly what you're up to and why you framed Paul for killing you, and then you can find a way of getting all three of us out of here, so you can go to Tanner and make it absolutely clear that you aren't even the teeniest bit dead, and then... Excuse me. It was hard to associate the tiny whimpering voice with Ricky Wormtorter. Slight problem there. You see, I can't leave here and go back to real space. Oh, really? Why's that? Well, Ricky said reasonably, I'm dead. Over there, anyhow. No, honest, I am. It's just here that I'm alive. That's why I came here. You see, I have, He paused and bit his lip. Reasons. Sophie's mouth flopped open. You're kidding. Alas, no. Ricky's mouth folded into a sad smile. Wish I was, but I'm not. And the fact of the matter is, I am dead. Back home, anyway. Chock full of arsenic. And he did kill me. Not on purpose, obviously, he added quickly. But the bitch of it is, I did a really bang-up job making it look like poor old Paul here murdered me. And there's absolutely no way he could possibly ever prove otherwise. And in trade circles, this thing about innocent till proven guilty is actually sort of the other way round. He grinned weakly, which couldn't have been easy for a man whose chin made Kirk Douglas look like a parsnip. What happened is, you see, I really did die back there. It was real arsenic in the custard slice. I know because I put it there myself, while poor old Paul here was mopping coffee off his crutch. I was dead for a bit, but my old mate Mr. Dow at the bank owed me a favour in return for worming his three-headed dog one time, and he let me stash a spare body and a quart of AB negative in a safe deposit box. I came here through the door in Benny Shumway's room. Obviously there's one in this dimension, same as in real space. And I was just on my way out when I saw Sophie's email, so I dashed off and collared the sword, which was a piece of cake because it exists in all 5 dimensions simultaneously, the way swords do. And here I am. I'm afraid Paul and I are both stuck here pretty much for the duration. You're not, of course, you can go back any time, but not us. Sorry. But that's... Sophie shot him a look of pure, cold fury. You've ruined everything, our whole lives, everything. You... Just a second, Paul interrupted. Bastard, Ricky said with a hint of impatience cutting through the guilt. Yes, I know. I think we've established that point already. But be practical for heaven's sake. I mean, if you can suggest anything we can do that'll put things right, then yes, I'm up for it. No worries. Unfortunately, I can't think of anything. Can you? I'm open to suggestions. Just a second, Paul insisted, so loudly this time that both of them turned and looked at him. Sorry to interrupt, he went on, but what did you just say? Not you. Her. Oh, I was just explaining to Musclehead here, Sophie growled, about how he's made a complete bitch of everything, and it's all his fault, and...
You said our, Paul interrupted. Our whole lives.
Yes, that's right, and it's no good him standing there like 2 yards of concentrated pillock saying there's nothing he can do about it, because...
No, hang on, Paul insisted. There's something I want to get straight before we go any further. When you said our whole lives, you meant you and me, right?
Well, yes, of course. I couldn't give a flying fuck about his life. Assuming, she added acidly, he still even got one.
That's what I thought you meant, Paul said. Only, sorry for being a bit slow, but why would him and me being stuck here forever ruin your life particularly? Because
I love you, you moron,
Sophie snapped. Then she paused as though she'd only then realised what she'd heard herself say. Oh, she added, and frowned thoughtfully. Paul didn't notice, but Ricky was looking at them both. First, bemused amazement, as though it had just started raining badgers, then a brief, uncontrollable spurt of anger, followed by a rather more self-conscious, radiant beam, as he clapped his hands together with a resounding crack and boomed, "Congratulations, kids! I always knew it would work out between you guys, and you see it's an ill wind." What did you say? Paul asked quietly. I said it's an ill wind that blows not you, her. Ricky shrugged, grinning, and started to walk away. If he thought he was off the hook, however, owing to a sudden outbreak of moonlight, laughter, love and romance, he'd underestimated Sophie's apparently limitless reserves of fury.
Not so fast, she snapped. We haven't finished with you. The explanation.
But Soph, Paul put in, and was ruthlessly shushed for his trouble. Oh, he mumbled under his breath, and went back to kneeling beside the fridge. He wasn't quite sure why, but he knew that his place was still at its side. Meanwhile, Ricky was getting glowered at.
The explanation, Sophie repeated. The one you were about to give us, remember, when the fridge appeared?
Ah, Ricky said. That explanation. Well, I think we've more or less covered that, really.
No, we haven't.
Sophie didn't stamp her foot, but her knee quivered.
You said there was someone after you, some him, who could follow you anywhere except here, and presumably that's why you staged your own death and got us all in this god-awful mess in the first place. So, who is he? Well,
Ricky sighed. It's embarrassing.
Embarrassing?
If Sophie had been a kettle, the room would have been full of steam.
You're dead. He's the most wanted man in Europe, and you're shy.
All right. For a moment, Ricky snatched a little of his old, arrogant authority. If it means so much to you, I'll tell you, but if you'll just shut up for a moment. He took a deep breath and sat down on the edge of a shelf, leaning forward, the sword across his knees. It was a long time ago, he said. A matter of honour, I guess you could call it. Let's say there was a very bad man back in the old country. A magician, goes without saying. He was being a real pain, beating up on my family and friends. I was young and just getting into the hero biz. When you're that age, of course, you think you can do any bloody thing. So I challenged him to a duel. Holmgang. Ricky went on, shaking his head slightly. Sorry, technical term. The two of you go to an island out in one of the big fjords, and only one of you comes back. It's a pretty big thing, very solemn, absolutely no cheating and absolutely no running away. Anyhow, we rowed out to the island in a little boat, didn't talk much naturally. I rowed and he sat there heading me. It was all a bit fraught. And then we started fighting, and well, Ricky said, turning his head away, he was winning. There was nothing I could do, so I ran. Not very far, he added, because it was a small island. After that I swam. The point is, I broke the rules and earned undying dishonour. Also, he added bitterly, I lost. I hate losing. And that's it, basically, he said, except that the other guy, the very bad person, didn't like me running out on him like that. He came after me, and I kept running. Long sigh. I still am. Sophie looked at him for a moment or so.
And that's why you came here?
Ricky nodded. I was sure I'd finally got shut of him, he said. It had been, well, a very long time. I hadn't seen or heard anything. I was starting to think he'd given up, got a life, died. But no, there he still was, fighting for me, bloody lurking, and this time he nearly got me. I was just an inch or so away. He stopped, shivered. I knew this time I had to do something a bit clever, because I've run out of places to hide over the years. So I figured, he wants me dead? Fine. give him what he wants. Sooner or later, once he knows I'm dead, he'll pack it in and go away. And then, after a really long interval, I can come out again, make a new life for myself, all that. Actually, Ricky said with a slight grimace, that's one detail I haven't quite got sorted yet, because when I say make a new life, that's exactly what I'm going to have to do if I ever want to get home without dropping dead the moment I cross the interface. But what the hell? One problem at a time. And I always knew I'd be stuck here for a good long while. It'll give me something to occupy my mind while I'm waiting. He breathed out, closed his eyes as though he'd just escaped from some oppressive burden. And that's it, he said. The whole sorry story. And really, I do regret most sincerely having to involve you two. But in my place, what would you have done? Sophie looked into Ricky's eyes for quite a long time, 5 seconds at least. And then she said, I think you're an unmitigated shit, Mr. Wormtoter. Then she stamped on his toes quite hard and walked away. Ow! Ricky yelped. What did you want to go and do that for? Fun, Sophie replied without looking round. Also, because you just killed old Mr. Wells, and even if you didn't, you still smashed up Paul's fridge, and he can't afford a new one, mostly though because I don't like you very much. A look of profound bewilderment and distress crossed Ricky's face. You don't? No. Oh. He hesitated. You could practically see the crumbling ruins of his cosmos tumbling about his shoulders. But that's... everybody likes me, he pointed out. I'm a very pleasant, affable sort of guy. Affable? Sophie repeated. Really? Well, let me tell you, Mr. Bloody Wormtoter, I wouldn't aff you if you were the last man left alive in the whole world. Ricky was starting to get annoyed. That's so tight, he said. Look, you don't know what he's like. This very bad person. If he was after you, I'm telling you, there's nothing you wouldn't do to get away from him. All right, so I set up varied features here. Big deal. I knew how incredibly resourceful and clever he is. I knew he'd be okay. I mean, he's been dead twice, 3 times, and hardly turned a hair. That's how it is with best mates. You know you can do stuff, you can trust your best mate to got your back. Do what's got to be done. Look after himself. It's a sign of respect, really. He turned to Paul. And we're mates, aren't we, Paul, old chum? Paul looked at him. No. Yes, we fucking are. Ricky's knuckles were white around the sword's hilt. Look what I've done for you. Your first day with the firm, I bought you lunch, looked after you, took you under my wing, taught you the pest control biz. No, you didn't. That was Benny Shumway. You weren't there. You'd been captured by Countess Judy, remember? And if it wasn't for me... Yes, but I saved your life. You shot me with a crossbow, Paul reminded him. It hurt. Boss, death was instantaneous. You never felt a thing. It felt like feeling something, Paul shrugged. The conversation was getting tedious as far as he was concerned. Truth is, he said, I don't like you either. Big deal. Ricky breathed out through his nose. So we've had our ups and downs, he said. So what? It's been more ups and downs. That's got to count for something. Didn't I give you a magic sword? What, the one you've got in your hand? Right there. Besides, Paul pointed out, I didn't want it. I stuck it under the sofa where I didn't have to look at it. I tried chucking it out once, but the nasty thing's so sharp it went through the bottom of the bin liner so fast it nearly pinned my toes to the floor. Yes, but it's the thought of... No, it isn't, Paul snapped, unexpectedly loud. The thought doesn't matter a toss. What matters is a terrifyingly dangerous mess you get people into. Now, will you please shut up? I'm trying to figure out an escape plan, and you whinging away in the background isn't making it any easier. When Ricky Wormtoter shrugged his mighty shoulders, it was like watching 2 herds of bison walking towards each other. Suit yourself, he said. For the record, I don't like you much either. I've never liked you, not from day one. He edged around on his shelf until he was facing away from Paul and towards Sophie. Ungrateful bastard, he said. I really went out of my way for him, you know. Well, of course you do. You were there. And anyway, he added, chivying a smile onto his face, he's just a bit upset right now. It's making him want to lash out, say stuff he doesn't mean. Really? Said Sophie sweetly. Such as? Ricky sighed. Right, fine, he said, holding up his left hand. Look, I think we're all getting a little bit overtired and overwrought here. Best thing, if you ask me, would be a nice, sociable, relaxing drink followed by a good rest, maybe a couple of hours' sleep. Just so happens, he added, reaching inside of his jacket, I've got a bottle of premium Estonian vodka here in my inside pocket. The good stuff, 287 proof. Any takers? Instinctively, Paul and Sophie looked at each other. 200 and what? Sophie asked in an awestruck voice. 87. Distilled and bottled in Kotler Jahre Dragon's Knot brand. One sip of that and you'll be amazed at how much cheerier things will look. Ricky pulled out a fat square bottle and shook 3 shot glasses out of his sleeve. Remembering the night the fridge first spoke to him, Paul shuddered and looked away. Sophie, on the other hand, was plainly interested in spite of herself.
Funny name,
she said. Ricky grinned, filled a glass and handed it to her. Traditional, he said, like, the Polish stuff. It's called buffalo grass because they put a blade of special grass in it to give it that special flavour. Well, same principle. Sophie, who just swallowed her first dose of the stuff, immediately turned green, and then she burped.
Actually, she said, isn't bad. Another.
Pleasure. Ricky refilled her glass. Sure I can't tempt you? He asked Paul, who shook his head and swallowed hard. Here's health, then, he said, picking up his own glass and holding it a few inches from his nose, as though savouring the bouquet. I always carry a bottle with me for just this sort of situation. Butterfingers, he added, as Sophie's glass, now empty, slipped through her fingers and rolled across the floor. Well, you're a convert, obviously, he said to her.
Great,
Sophie muttered.
Funny taste, mine. Reminds me of something.
She pulled a deep, thoughtful face, eyebrows scrunched up, lips pouting.
Actually, reminds me of...
Then, with a long, sweet sigh, she flopped onto her back like a carpet unrolling and went to sleep. Is she all right? Paul asked sharply. Ricky turned to him and grinned. There was a look in his eyes that wasn't reassuring. Oh, she's fine, he said. Absolutely fine. In about 20 minutes or so, she'll wake up, and about 5 seconds after that, she'll be happier than she's ever been before. Life for her will be one sweet song forever and ever. A 40-watt bulb lit up the back of Paul's mind. Oh, yes, he said. Why? Ricky laughed. Not quite a full-blown villain's laugh, but it had nothing to do with seeing the funny side. Because what could be better than being young and in love, he said. Well, different in your case, obviously, because you'll never get the girl, even if they start hiding them in the bottom of his cereal packets. But in 20 minutes' time, dear sweet little Sophie's going to open her puffy little eyes and gaze at the face of the man she's going to love for the rest of her life. Now, he went on, standing up and flipping the sword nonchalantly round in his hand, that face belongs to one of the 2 men in this room. Another hint, it's not you. The click of bits of information falling into place in Paul's mind was as deafening as a tap-dancing contest in a galvanized iron bridge. All too late, unfortunately. The drink, Paul mumbled. The what's-its-name vodka. It's not that at all. It's that bloody love filter stuff. Got so in the end, Rick sighed. Took you long enough. That's right, mainstay of J.W. for over 2 centuries. Never fails. Satisfaction guaranteed or your life back. You may have noticed, he added, edging forward a step or two, that I didn't drink mine. No offence, because I know you're soft on a stupid bitch, but really she's not my type. Doesn't matter so long as she loves me. That's all that's required for the job in hand, and there's no point over-egging the pudding, as my old granny used to say. Paul backed away, pointless because he knew he was no match for Ricky Wormtorter in reach, speed, skill, or agility. Bastard, he said. You vicious bastard, why? Ricky sighed melodramatically. I wish people would stop calling me that, he said. For someone in my line of work, I am pathetically sentimental. For starters, I ought to kill you right now. It'd solve a lot of problems. It'd solve everything. He breathed out impatiently, as though chiding himself for his weakness. But I can't, he said. Not unless I have to. Self-defense or whatever. Partly it's the old code of chivalry stuff. Partly because, he shrugged. Anyhow, he said, that's not relevant. You'll be relieved to hear I'm not proposing to kill you or even hurt you. Except, he added, I need to give you a tiny little tap on the head, just enough to put you to sleep until after Sophie wakes up. Attention to detail is 99% of the heroism business, and I don't want any possibility of you being around when she wakes up, so you're going to have a pleasant nap in the stationery cupboard. May even come and let you out again, if I remember. He stepped forward again, and somehow he seemed to have covered far more than a single stride of carpet. He was looming over Paul like an unfriendly Alp. I'll ask you to keep still if you don't mind, he said. I'm pretty good at precision knocking out, but there's always a very slight element of risk, and we don't want you ending up with the smashed skull and permanent brain damage. Ricky's left hand closed into a big fist. Look, Paul said, you can bash me up all you like. You can kill me if you feel you really must. But can't you just let her alone, for crying out loud? It's not fair. She's never done you any harm. That's all you know, Ricky snapped. For your information, that bloody woman... He pulled a stern face. Tell you later, he said. Maybe if you're good and hold still, but just in case I never get another opportunity, I'll tell you this. There's a whole lot more to Sophie Pettingell than meets the eye, and if you think what I'm going to do to her is a bit nasty and mean, you don't know the half of it. He paused and then laughed harshly like a dog barking. No pun intended. Okay, hold still. There may be some slight discomfort. He raised his fist and Paul looked away. Accordingly, he saw the door start to open a split second before Ricky did, and a tiny little scrap of self-preservation instinct that had been hibernating in with all the cowardice and freezing with terror stuff at the back of his mind ever since he'd been born suddenly blossomed into action. He jumped sideways. Ricky's fist crashed into the angle iron shelves behind him. Ricky yelled with pain and started to make predictions about Paul's immediate future, which wasn't apparently terribly promising. He didn't get very far, however, because the door was open now and someone was charging into the room. Ricky saw him, yelped with terror and sprang back. He landed in a perfect high forehand guard, sword held out, knee slightly bent, and his face was as white as soap powder commercial laundry. That would have been remarkable enough in any other context, but Paul noticed it in passing and immediately dismissed it from his mind as trivial when compared with the other remarkable thing on display at that precise moment. Namely, a tall, slim young man in chainmail armour, holding a round shield in his left hand and a long dark-blued sword in his right. His whole body radiated purpose and quivered with pure aggression, and you could have barbecued shish kebabs over the fire burning in his eyes. He was terrifying. Clearly extremely competent in the use of edged weapons, palpably afraid of nothing in this world or the next, and his face was exactly what Paul would expect to see when he looked in a mirror.